It was never supposed to be serious, just a bit of thrill. But now, it has become one of my deepest regrets. People have read about it, and I keep asking myself, have you ever made a mistake like this? How do you handle the consequences when you know you've gone too far? I messed up badly, and it eats at me every day. I don't even know how to fix it anymore. I'm 40. My husband is 45, and we've been married for 7 years. We also have a 5-year-old son. My husband and I met through a mutual friend when neither of us was searching for a serious relationship. We just wanted some fun, but the connection grew, and soon enough, we were exclusive. 2 years later, we were married. He's now a software engineer at Google, and I work in sales for an insurance company. Life was good. We had stability, comfort, and family, until I ruined it all. It started about 5 months ago. My husband had just been promoted, which meant longer hours at the office. He came home drained, too tired to engage with me in any way. Our intimacy faded. Each time I tried to initiate, he dismissed me with an excuse. Always too tired or too stressed. His indifference left me frustrated and lonely. I tried not to let it consume me, so I shifted my focus entirely to work. At the time, I was tasked with securing a major client for my company, a man named Jay, 48, who owned a small fintech firm. If we could sign his business for corporate health insurance, it would be a huge win. My boss emphasized that I needed to do everything possible to secure him, including being more personable and less rigid. The insurance market was struggling, and every client mattered. So I followed instructions. I started being friendlier with Jay, balancing professionalism with small talk. Meanwhile, things at home only worsened. My husband brushed off my concerns, insisting it was just work stress, but he made no effort to connect. I eventually stopped trying altogether. With our son away at summer camp, the silence at home grew heavier. What once was our time became emptiness. My meetings with Jay became the distraction I didn't know I was seeking. He was witty, charming, and pleasant to be around. Lunches and coffees for business often slipped into casual conversations, sometimes bordering on subtle flirtation. I brushed it off at first, telling myself I was overthinking it. But deep down, I noticed, and I liked it. One afternoon, I accidentally spilled water on myself during lunch with Jay, and I caught him glancing at me in a way that was more than friendly. Instead of being uncomfortable, I felt seen. Something I hadn't felt in months at home. That small moment gave me a rush I hadn't experienced in a long time. I knew it was wrong to crave that kind of attention, but my self-esteem had already taken too many blows. As time went on, my connection with Jay drifted away from work. He started inviting me out for meals unrelated to business, and I welcomed the escape. The attraction between us grew undeniable, though I told myself it was harmless, that it wouldn't cross the line. But the reality was, my marriage felt like a hotel stay. My husband barely noticed me, barely asked questions, barely cared. Then one day, over lunch, I initiated something reckless. I touched Jay in a way that made it clear what I wanted. His response confirmed it, and that night, I gave in. We ended up at his place, and I slept with him. I slipped out in the middle of the night, guilt pressing on me as I drove home. My husband had called twice, but by the time I got back, he was already asleep. I lied the next morning, saying I had a late work meeting. He barely reacted. I promised myself it was just a one-time mistake. With Jay's contract nearly finalized, I figured it would be easier to cut ties. But the guilt didn't erase the craving. A week later, Jay surprised me outside my office. He hugged me and admitted he missed me. I told him we couldn't repeat that night, but his words, "You can't deny what's between us," broke my resolve. We kissed, and before long, we were in his car, giving in again. That was the real beginning of the affair. Jay knew I was married with a child, and accepted it. I told him we had to stay discreet, and he agreed, because my husband had stopped showing much interest in my life. I didn't even need to invent elaborate lies. Vague excuses worked because he never asked for details. Oddly, his indifference made me feel worse. Not because he trusted me, but because he simply didn't care. Jay and I met in secret, sometimes at his place, sometimes after work, sometimes even in risky spots like cars or elevators. The danger of it all gave me an adrenaline rush I hadn't felt in years. It was thrilling, addictive. With him, I felt alive again, like I was rediscovering a part of myself I had lost. When my son returned from camp 2 months later, I had to adjust, but I still found ways to keep seeing Jay. He reassured me whenever I worried about the future, reminding me we could take things one day at a time. That reassurance meant more than I realized, because my husband never gave it, not before, and certainly not now. If I'm honest, this distance between me and my husband didn't start with his promotion. He had always been consumed by work, leaving me to handle everything at home and with our son. The promotion just amplified what was already there. Over time, I stopped blaming him and started focusing only on what I was getting from Jay. He gave me attention, intimacy, and comfort, things I had been craving for far too long. And with each passing day, my husband's absence mattered less and less. It became clear that my husband truly didn't care about me. Deep down, I had seen the signs earlier, but chose to ignore them. He hadn't once tried to be intimate with me anymore. I wasn't even interested at that point. But it still showed how little I mattered to him. I thought about separating for good, but I set those thoughts aside for the sake of our son. Even if my husband was not a good partner, he was a good father. He always made sure our son got everything he needed, especially his time and attention. Whenever he did put work aside, it was always for our child. I couldn't bring myself to separate my son from his father, nor did I want to share custody where my child would have to move between us. So I decided to stay in the marriage for my son's sake. My love for my husband faded quickly, leaving only my son as the reason I stayed. Work was going well. My relationship with Jay was going smoothly, and at home things were as good as they could be under the circumstances. My husband was still consumed by work, so much so that I believed he wouldn't even notice if I disappeared. I arranged my time with Jay around my lunch breaks, so after work I could head straight home to my son. Jay understood my situation and always adjusted to whatever worked for me. He was incredibly considerate. I thought everything was under control, but I was wrong. One afternoon, as I was leaving for lunch with Jay, my phone slipped down the stairs and broke. I planned to fix it later, since I didn't want to delay meeting him. Jay invited me to his home, and because it was a Friday, I skipped the rest of my workday. By 6 o'clock, I was back home. My usual time, but my son wasn't there. Only Beth, our nanny, was home. She told me that my son had developed a high fever at school and was taken to the hospital. His teacher had tried calling me several times, but since my phone was broken, I didn't get the calls. My husband had answered instead and was already with our son. I rushed to the hospital, feeling guilty that I wasn't there. When I arrived, I saw my husband sitting by our son, listening to him talk about school. I immediately went to his side. Thankfully, he was already doing better. The doctor came in and explained it was just the flu, and he was fine to go home. I drove our son back, while my husband returned to the office, saying he had left work suddenly to get to the hospital. That night, I put my son to bed and promised myself I'd fix my phone first thing in the morning. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to find my husband standing silently at the doorway. At first I was startled, but then I saw it was him, still dressed in his work clothes. He said he had just gotten home and wanted to check on our son. Then he asked me where I had been when the teacher was calling. I told him my phone had broken, which was why no one could reach me. He looked skeptical. I pointed to my broken phone on the shelf, its cracked screen visible. But then he told me something that made my heart sink. He had called my office, and they said I left for lunch and never came back. I stammered out an excuse about a late meeting, hoping he would accept it. He didn't show whether he believed me or not, but he let the matter drop. The next day, I stayed home with my son, but went out briefly to replace my phone. The first person I contacted was Jay. I explained everything, and as always, he was understanding. Meanwhile, my husband never mentioned the incident again. For the next few days, life went back to normal. My son recovered and returned to school. I returned to work, and I continued meeting Jay on my lunch breaks. Then one Friday, I came home to find my husband already there, something that hadn't happened in a long time. I smiled at him and was about to take a shower when he stopped me. Calmly, he asked where I had been during lunch that day. I froze, wondering how he knew. He explained that he had come by my office to get my signature on some documents and found I wasn't there. I gave the same excuse as before. He nodded, let it go, and as I was leaving, he whispered that he trusted me. Those words shattered me. The guilt hit harder than ever. I was betraying him, yet he still said he trusted me. In the shower, I broke down crying. He hadn't been a good husband, but I wasn't being a good wife either. I knew then I couldn't keep living this double life. I had to choose. Either confess and end my marriage, or cut things off with Jay. The idea of losing either one left me in tears. Jay had been kind and supportive, but I knew we had no real future. I couldn't abandon my son or my family. I decided that after the weekend, I would meet Jay one last time and end it. But it was already too late. The next day, Saturday, I stayed home with my son. My husband also stayed in instead of going to the office, which was unusual. The day before, he had come home early too. Something felt off, but I told myself it was just guilt making me paranoid. When our son went to the park with Beth, my husband sat with me in the living room and said we needed to talk. His voice was calm, almost too calm. That's when I realized he already knew. He told me he was aware of the affair. He explained how he suspected when I started coming home late, but got confirmation after our son's hospitalization. He admitted he had come to my office at lunchtime and followed me, even taking photos of me and Jay together. He showed me the pictures, me and Jay kissing, my hands all over him. There was no way to deny it. So I confessed. I told him everything, how it started after his promotion, how ignored and unwanted I felt, and how Jay made me feel seen. He listened with a neutral expression, but when I said I was planning to end it, he laughed bitterly. He said he couldn't believe anything I said anymore. He told me that while he might not have been the best husband, he never cheated. He reminded me of how hard he worked to provide for us, and that he had even been planning a family trip abroad. Then he said harshly, "I wanted to give you and our son everything, but you betrayed me." I couldn't stop crying. He revealed that the day he said he trusted me, he was actually giving me one last chance to admit the truth. After leaving me sobbing in the living room, he returned with a glass of water and an envelope. I instantly knew what it was. Divorce papers. He confirmed it, saying he had prepared them after catching me with Jay. I wasn't ready to let go, but he was. Inside, I saw he was asking for full custody of our son. I objected immediately. I told him I'd never agree to those terms, but he coldly replied that it didn't matter. He would make sure our son stayed with him. He said it was best if I signed quietly, and he would allow me visitation. Otherwise, he threatened to tell our son everything, that his mother cheated on his father, and that he would grow up resenting me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The thought of my 5-year-old learning something like that horrified me, but knowing my husband, I realized he would do whatever it took to get what he wanted. It was clear my husband was prepared to use our son against me. I had already hurt my child by having an affair, even though he didn't know it. The guilt was heavy enough, and I couldn't risk him growing up to hate me. I tried reasoning with my husband, explaining that there was no point in taking our son away. He was constantly busy with work, and it would be better if our son stayed with me. I even begged him not to go through with it, but my tears and pleading didn't matter. He stood firm, saying I had 2 days to sign the papers. He also demanded I cut all ties with Jay immediately, or he would show our son pictures of us together. I didn't know if he was serious, but I couldn't take the risk. I wanted my son to have a stable, healthy future. That night, after my husband left me in the living room, I called Jay and ended things. Jay knew my son meant everything to me, so he didn't argue. He just told me to take care of myself and reach out if I ever needed help. I was grateful for that, even if he never knew it. I also contacted my lawyer and told him about the custody terms. He explained that I had every right to refuse and could even fight for sole custody. But I couldn't tell him about my husband's threat to expose my affair to our son. Deep down, I felt trapped. Either I refused and risked my son hating me forever, or I signed and let him stay with his father. I chose the second option. It was painful, but I'd rather my son remember me without bitterness. When I finally signed, my husband seemed satisfied. He told me I had 1 week to explain to our son why I was moving out. He knew how hard it would be for me, and I could tell he wanted me to suffer. I had made mistakes, but I never imagined losing my child would be the cost. Telling my son I was leaving was the hardest moment of my life. He cried endlessly, and I broke down with him. I tried to explain that his dad would take care of him, and that we would still see each other. The pain in his eyes nearly crushed me, but I had to stay strong for him. I spent that entire week cherishing every moment. On Friday, after dropping him at school, I told him I wouldn't be home when he got back. He cried again, and I hugged him tight, promising we'd meet soon. A small part of me hoped that seeing me in so much pain might make my husband change his mind, but he never did. I moved into a company apartment on short notice. My husband showed no emotion as I left. He only told me the divorce papers had been filed and that his lawyers would contact me. I told him to take care of our son and apologized again. He simply said I didn't need to worry. He would handle everything. It has now been over a month since that day. The divorce is still being processed, but since it's uncontested, it should be finalized soon. My ex allows me to talk to my son 3 times a week, and while I'm grateful, I miss him terribly. The only comfort I have is knowing my husband has always been a good father. My son even told me that his dad comes home early now to play with him. Hearing that was bittersweet. I couldn't help but think, if only he had done that for me earlier, maybe things would have been different. I haven't spoken to Jay since the night I ended it, and he hasn't reached out either. I'm thankful for that. I wouldn't have the strength to handle it while being apart from my son. The regret of my choices weighs on me daily. If I hadn't given in to temptation, I would still be in my home with my son, and perhaps things with my husband might have slowly improved. Update. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. When my lawyer asked if I wanted anything from my husband, I refused. The only thing I wanted was my son, and since that wasn't possible, nothing else mattered. My husband has already moved on. My son told me one morning he saw Beth, our nanny, coming out of his father's room. It shocked me, but I reminded myself I had no right to complain. I was the one who had cheated and destroyed the marriage. Still, it hurt. I told my son maybe Beth had just forgotten something, not wanting to upset him. Even though my ex had once used my son against me, I refused to stoop to the same level. I wouldn't poison my child's mind against his father. I was just grateful Beth still let my son call me whenever he asked. Perhaps she felt guilty, but either way, I appreciated it. I also began taking my son with me on weekends. Those short visits became the highlight of my life. He made sure to share every little detail so I didn't feel left out. But the regret of starting that affair never left me, especially when I had to drop him back at the house that used to be mine. Update. A year later, my son has just turned 6. He has adjusted to the changes well. He stopped crying for me about 6 months after I left. Now he just smiles when I drop him off. which brings mixed emotions. On one hand, I'm glad he's not hurting anymore. On the other, I worry he doesn't miss me as much. My ex-husband is now engaged to Beth, and they plan to marry in 6 months. Even though I was the one who cheated, seeing them together in the house I once built with him still stings. I found out when I went to drop my son off and saw them kissing, with Beth wearing an engagement ring. My ex seemed pleased that I noticed. He even kissed her again, as if to show me he was taking his revenge. I managed to smile, kissed my son goodbye, and left. To those who have supported me without judgment, thank you. I don't know you personally, but your words of empathy have meant more than you know.